It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. The Trump administration informed Congress on Wednesday that it plans to approve the sale of 19 F-16 fighter jets to the small Arab kingdom of Bahrain. The multi-billion-dollar sale had been held up by President Obama because of human rights concerns in the island nation. The approval of this sale is just the latest in a series of signs that Trump administration is loosening human rights considerations when it comes to promoting U.S. arms deals. Are the potential buyers of U.S. arms that had been previously been put on hold include Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and Taiwan. Joining us now to discuss the latest development in U.S. arms sales from New York is William Hartung. William is a senior advisor with Security Assistance Monitor and the director of Arms and Security Project at the Center for International Policy. He's also the author of Prophets of War, Lockheed Martin, and the Making of the Military-Industrial Complex. William, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
So, William, what do you think will be the consequences of Trump jettisoning the Obama administration's halt on Bahrain's arms sales?
Well, I think it's interesting to note that it took a lot of pressure from NGOs and civil society to get the Obama administration to take the couple of steps that it did to suspend the sale to Bahrain and also hold back on some precision-guided munitions to Saudi Arabia that would have been used in their bombing in Yemen. But the overall pattern under Obama was quite robust sales, in fact, record numbers of new orders to the Saudis and others in the region. So we have a situation where the U.S. was already a major supplier, and the few signals that perhaps there was concern about human rights are exactly what the Trump administration is eliminating. So it doesn't bode well for, I think, a democracy movement in the region in terms of any pressure from the U.S. To kind of curb or attempt to curb human rights abuses by regimes like the one in Bahrain or like the Saudis.
So, William, are you saying that the Obama administration's measures to sanction Bahrain because of human rights violations was somewhat superficial?
Well, I think it was significant in the U.S. context, in the sense that it's rare that such a thing is done, especially an ally that hosts, major U.S. naval bases and so forth. So I wouldn't completely dismiss it. I was thinking more in terms of their overall policy towards the region, that it was one of the few examples where they were, in essence, doing the right thing.
So in terms of the human rights violations of Bahrain, how grave were they? And, as you just said, the Obama administration had no problem selling arms to Saudi Arabia and others in the Gulf, billions of dollars worth of arms, in spite of their human rights violations. So why did they isolate Bahrain in this way?
Well, Bahrain cracked down heavily on the democracy movement at the time of the Arab Spring, with help from the Saudis, in fact. And they've basically jailed nonviolent activists. They've closed opposition political parties. They've engaged in torture. So, are they worse than the Saudis? Well, perhaps only in the sense that there was a democracy movement that had the chance to make a difference that they put down rather viciously. So I think partly it was lobbying by human rights groups. I think partly it was that the Saudis are bigger players. They have more clout. It's harder to get a U.S. government to take strong action against them. So I think there were some inequities of power that allowed, restrictions on Bahrain that should also have been in place on the Saudis.
Right. And as I mentioned in the introduction, other countries that Trump wants to provide a green light for in terms of arms sales is Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and Taiwan. Saudi Arabia is currently involved in the civil war in Yemen, Turkey in Iraq and Syria. Egypt is also cracking down on dissent. What impact do you think selling arms to these countries will have?
Well, there's all kinds of potential negative effects. I mean, the sales to Taiwan will rile up relations with China. There's always been sort of a line beyond which the U.S. has promised not to go, despite a rather, robust trade in arms with Taiwan. And so to withdraw further from any of those lines and across those lines I think will create tensions with China that are unnecessary without really changing the security position of Taiwan dramatically. In the case of Egypt, you've got a repressive regime that could easily use U.S. weaponry to put down its own population. Turkey, of course, Erdogan has become more and more of an authoritarian figure and cracked down on all manner of opposition. So basically, it's the Trump administration on the side of dictatorship, on the side of increased tension, beyond the problems we already had in the Obama era.
And in terms of these arms sales, who's really spearheading these strategies to open up the American arms industry to these countries in the Trump administration?
Well, it's hard to judge who's making decisions. It's a chaotic group, as you know, but certainly you've got a strong anti-Iran contingent in the White House itself with people like Steve Bannon. So they certainly would favor open sales to the Saudis and the Gulf states. But also Secretary of Defense Mattis has been quite hardline on Iran. In fact, he wanted to attack Iran from Iraq during the U.S. presence there when he was head of the Central Command. So there may not be too many players urging restraint within the inner circles and even the cabinet level of this administration. So I think, unfortunately, most of the people that Trump is listening to are on the wrong side of the issue.
Right. Now, in terms of economic nationalism, one of the biggest objectives of the Trump administration, this measure of opening up arms sales means that the arms industry in the U.S. can get a big increment in sales moving forward. What do such arms sales do to the U.S. economy?
Well, they're often overrated in terms of their overall impact. People seem to have a sense that there's some huge part of U.S. exports, when in fact they're probably a couple percentage points. But what they do is, they keep factories open and extend production lines in places like St. Louis, Missouri, where Boeing makes F-15s, in Texas, where the F-16s that would go to Bahrain are being built. Likewise in St. Louis for the F-18, which is being sold in the region, and also for things like M1 tanks, which are built in Ohio and Michigan, which are key Trump swing states, of course. So it's more of a political economic impact. It's pork barrel politics. It's putting contracts in the states and districts of powerful legislators. But in terms of exports, there's any number of other kinds of exports that would be more beneficial to the United States. The problem is, unlike in other places where the U.S. gives aid, say to Egypt to buy U.S. weapons or to Israel, the Gulf states pay cash. So it's kind of a net gain in that sense, that there's no U.S. taxpayer subsidies for the U.S. companies to be able to get this revenue. So in that sense, there's perhaps fewer obstacles than would be for countries that would need aid to subsidize the purchases.
Right. And William, being an advocate, a great advocate of the disarmament movement, what other way can Trump stimulate the economy so it has a more positive job-creating impact without selling arms?
Well, I think we need an overarching strategy to build a more sustainable economy, which neither candidate in the last election really had one. But Jeffrey Sachs has done a very good book on how to build a sustainable economy in the United States, trying to pursue the UN Millennium Development Goals. So eliminating poverty, getting rid of energy sources that promote climate change and so forth. So I think you would want an alternative energy strategy that stresses wind, solar, other alternatives, a smarter grid, perhaps more electric cars, a better transportation system that cuts down on use of automobiles and so forth. So I think you would need an overall plan that was not just, using the word infrastructure, but really thought ahead in terms of what kind of infrastructure, what kind of energy system, what kind of support for housing around the country. And that, of course, would require a federal government that wants to make public investments. And we certainly don't have that at the moment. But I think that vision needs to be put forward, because if we go into another election where the Democratic side has no comprehensive alternative to just, selling arms and living off of speculation on Wall Street and so forth, then even somebody with all the downsides of a Trump or whoever would succeed Trump should he step aside, would still have a shot. I mean, one of the reasons Trump got elected was because he gave the impression that he cared about the working class. I think if you dig a little deeper, you see that his policies will do more harm than good in that respect. But he stood up and said he was going to stand up to the corporations, for example, which was Hillary Clinton was hard-pressed to do when she was making $250,000 speeches on Wall Street. So, we need kind of a clear, progressive, populist economic plan. And if we had one that was thorough enough, then these arms sales and other items of military procurement would not loom so large as they do now.
I've been speaking with William Hartung. He's the senior advisor with Security Assistance Monitor and Director of Arms and Security Project at the Center for International Policy. William, I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.